going to introduce him and allow him to take the floor is Dr. T.A. Elias Fatile, Senior Counselor of the Permanent Mission of Nigeria.
Excellencies here present, the organizers, gentlemen, my excellencies here, and the moderator on the high table, ladies and gentlemen. I must stress that I'm representing my peer, Ambassador Joy Ugu. I must say that clearly. As announced earlier, she is currently attending a debate at the Security Council, and she was actually looking forward to come over here. But up to now, she has not been able to present Nigeria's statement at the debate on protection of civilians in armed conflicts. And so somehow the Lord just fell on me, and I received a directive. Just go there and represent me. And I was wondering that, well, God will assist me to see what I can do. Just about 1 hour ago, 1 hour 30 minutes, and I will see how we can go far together. I will ever try my best and face the challenge, but I'm glad that the moderator made a mistake by inviting my senior colleague to start. And so he has started very well. And the good thing is now I'm now sandwiched in between two ambassadors. Then the ambassador will now round it up, which is a very good one. I want to congratulate the organizers and then thank them for inviting the PR and inviting us to this meeting where we're talking about Africa. And I want to start by stressing some facts that even as a PhD student, incidentally I did my PhD in Paris, just like His Excellency, I have always been seeing African perspective from a different perspective. And I will try to see how I can do justice to that. I see it just like a cup of water that is half full. And so we can say this cup is half full, and at the same time we can say it is half empty. And I will try to talk along that line briefly. Africa has a very rich culture, cherished culture. And incidentally, let me give an example just today. As we came over here, and we were at a gathering with the organizers, and the room was choked up, and my ambassador from South Africa came in. In the African culture, you respect your elders. You respect senior ones. And I stood up for him. I said, sir, you are my elder, you are senior to me. That's African culture. We cherish that so much. Africa has rich materials and human resources, as you know. And Africa has become the bride of the world. You can see the East, the West, everybody is trying to make friends with Africa. We are very indispensable in the system. And I believe very much that the prosperity of Africa is also central to global prosperity. A more secure Africa will be a more prosperous Africa. I'm glad that the moderator started by saying some things about the African Union. I will just try to emphasize some of those things. The desire to unify such a huge and diverse continent was bound by involved significant challenges. But a more united Africa has the potential to achieve greater security for African populations. As she said, you all know, the African Union was established and amidst the furor of an African renaissance and renewed hope in the ideology of Pan-Africanism. It was a product of the combined vision and effort of several leading African states to form a supranational organization for the continent to address African problem in our own way, finding solution to Africa's problem. And so AU was established to tackle the current problems plaguing the continent: poor governance, we know that, political instability, insecurity, and conflict. AU was created to have fundamentally different principles. I'm glad she said it. Ideas and organs to its predecessor, and therefore, hopefully, a fundamentally different role on the continent. So that is the beginning of it. For us to realize that we have to take the bull by the horns and face our challenges by ourselves and find solutions to it, I think is a plus for the African continent. The AU was inspired, and the most important principle behind the AU is the governing the AU is that Article 4.1 of the Constitutive Act, which grants the right of the Union to intervene in a member state pursuant to a decision of the Assembly in respect of grave circumstances, like war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. It's a significant departure from the OAU's principle of non-intervention and shows a willingness to take action to defend the security and well-being of African populations. And like she mentioned, there have been lots of success stories in this regard. The African Union mission in Somalia, for example, is viewed by many commentators as having been a relatively success story. Somalia has over 2 decades represented the epitome of a failed state, embroiled in clan-based warfare and the rise of militants. But Africa, stood to the challenges and composed primarily of Uganda, that's AMISOM. Uganda, Kenya, and Burundi troops was established in 2007 with funding from assistance from EU and the USA, and they were able to really stabilize the country, enable humanitarian activities, and protect government institutions to work. And we're still expecting more progress in that country. The United Nations, I must say, is really trying, and we appreciate what the United Nations is doing. I can't do without it. But it's clear that to develop the capacity to solve our problems lies within African people and African continent. And Africa, is the future of security in Africa, and a more united continent will be a more secure one. And I'm glad to say that Africa, is really trying its best in this regard. Even in my PhD thesis, I made certain argument about the Westphalian state treaty in Europe. It took a long time, crisis, fighting, wars all over, before eventually they reach where they are. Eventually we'll get there. Homegrown solutions are the best way to solve problems. African leaders, African people are closer to the people, easy to follow, easy to trust, and sustainable, and backed by political will. I'm glad His Excellency mentioned something. And that's the fact of the case. We have the potential of solving our problems in the reasons of it. Only that there have been conflicts of ideas. That's what I once argued that in my PhD work, that the African tradition, African culture has its own, but when the Western came and then some from other places, then there seems to be division. And then in my argument, I said that has been part of what we've been struggling with. Otherwise, Excellency just mentioned it. People fighting, and then you see the elderly women coming out, and then you stop fighting, you respect your elders. Those are the things, the values we had, and we still have, and which, if we are permitted, if we are allowed to promote these things, to encourage them, to strengthen them, it is clear that we have those potentials to really work with. As I was saying, the AU and its members have no shortage of ideas on how to resolve the continent peace and security challenges. African states and African statesmen have played frontline roles in brokering peace agreements and have sought ways through African system to end crisis. The AU has deployed ever more troops to peace operations in Africa, including Burundi, Cote d'Ivoire, Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, Mali, Sierra Leone, Somalia, Sudan, even South Sudan, and more recently in CAR, in Central African Republic. The AU is more robust and more mature than its predecessors. I said that, with meaningful institutions to tackle the continent's area of peace and security challenges. What we need is just the support from outside to see how we can, because we're in an interdependent world. So when we receive more support from outside for local initiative, local efforts, it will go a long way to assist us. As I begin to round up, I want to return to that same theory of the glass. I'm glad that the moderator mentioned the African peer review mechanism and other things that have been done. The initiative of we should appreciate the African continent, African Union in this regard. So it depends on the way you see it. Some people will say it is half full. Some will say it is half empty. But my position is that it is even 3/4 full, as we are, because we are making lots of progress. And we know there are still challenges, no doubt. Everybody has his own challenges. But corruption, high start-off costs, poor infrastructure, incoherent regulation, and weak government, we know we have them. It's not only in Africa. It's even all over the world in other places. It's not peculiar to the African continent. But then, the story is rapidly changing. The narrative is changing. That, I think, should be the message. And I continue to argue this in all the places I've had the interest to talk. And I think when the Lord suddenly fell on me to come and speak on behalf of my PR, I brought out my residual knowledge in this aspect, which I've argued in in my works. And then that's why I'm being able to argue this in this light. With recent increases in the disposable income of the citizenry, gradually there's improvement. Democratic trends favoring new entrants to the workforce, urbanization, and without the diversification of incomes outside traditional rural sectors, Africans are turning inward, investing at home, and setting the trends for how future businesses will and should be conducted on the continent. Sustainable business solutions are helping to underpin this encouraging trend. Let me give some instances. There's Togo-based EcoBank Group, which was supported initially by the ECOWAS Fund, was one of the first focus on cross-border expansion to Middle Africa. Then dominated by foreign and state-owned banks, the company now provides financial services in 33 African countries with assets valued at over $19 billion. Sorry, I'm trying to check my time to be sure I'm not exceeding the 15 minutes. Yes, okay. We have the UBA in Nigeria, the United Bank of Africa, is following suit. According to a recent survey, Nigerian and South African FDI flows to other African countries are over $1 billion each. My Excellency, I think you will agree with me in that regard, sir. And growing. Over the last decade, Kenya Commercial Bank Group investments were higher than multinationals such as Coca-Cola, Total, French cement conglomerate Lafarge, and others, ranking it among the top 5 investors on the continent. Those are the narratives that I believe very much about, that I'm promoting about the African continent. We have never had it this nice, and we are making progress, so we need to encourage ourselves to continue to make progress. This phenomenon runs contrary to our historical trade patterns, which have tended strongly towards the export of raw materials, both to the west and to the east. Africans are creating their own solutions. The focus on value-added processing before domestic or international sale, service-oriented businesses for the growing consumer class, expansion to neighboring countries with similar legal or socio-cultural practices to achieve economies of scale are all clear indications that we are making progress in the African continent. When companies engage in sustainable business practices, this also helps support intra-African trade, enabling companies to build scale quickly by tapping international capital and expanding regional and outside Africa. Now, African Union members have bonded together to create the African risk capacity. That's another area which has not been really discussed. And I encourage people to read very well about this, to study very well about this aspect. It's a groundbreaking extreme weather insurance scheme designed to model and price Africa's weather risk, where the private sector failed to invest. Progress is being made along this line. Now I realize that I have 2 or 3 minutes, and so I want to end with these thoughts, reflections on the areas which I think there's the challenges. We can ask, why is it that the trend continues in some countries, that efforts at nation building should lead to disintegration instead of integration? Those are questions that bothers us that we should begin to ask. And then why is it in the African issues on the agenda of the United Nations Security Council remain to be about 70%? Means that we have to do a policy shift, and we should build from the roots and not from top. We should not just address the symptoms, but we should address the causes. Why do we have problems with genuine reconciliations in some places? Those are the challenges. And the environment should be made safe for the people to live in and not through military might. Then Africa, as I said, has done this, and we still need to do more of this by raising core of mediators among African leaders from among our own people that will assist when there's need to mediate. These are just the thoughts I want to leave you with, and want to say on behalf of my PR, I'm glad to be here and congratulate the organizers. Thank you very much.